Again. So this one is the economic history of West Africa up to 1800 AD. So from if I'm going to start by the course outline, what is in the outline is the topics: environment of West Africa, the forest zone and savanna particularly. Then you have agriculture in West Africa, trade and commerce, the trans-Saharan trade, the transatlantic slave currency in West Africa, then transportation. So if I can try to take like four, or if I can take everything, so we're fine. But only need three to go. So to start with, the course is basically to examine the salient themes in the economic history of West Africa. This is because the history of any people cannot be fully grasped without the knowledge of how such a people went about the ordinary business of life, how they went about eking a living, and in trying to make the most out of their physical environment, basically. So, of course, by the 19th century, the economy of West Africa witnessed several changes. All right, but before the 19th century, it was a very dynamic, economy that the people operated from inception up to the 19th century. That's 1800, which is the end of your periodization. So, economic history is so important for you. It's one of the causes that is important for you to have a broader understanding of West Africa, development. Right? By West Africa, talking about the region which includes the southern portion of the board of the continent, which extend westward to the Atlantic Ocean. All right, and of course, you are doing some of the courses. So this region is bisected by the African Transition Zone, which borders the northern edge of the Sahara Desert. All right, basically that's where. So the main physical feature of this West African includes the Sahara Desert and the River Niger. All right, so the Cameroon Islands are located also in the eastern border between Nigeria and Cameroon. All right, so uh, and then there's the Niger River, all right, which is the third, the Niger River, which is the third largest river and extend more than 2,600 uh, no miles from the Guinea Island. So, with this historicity, let me go to the main topic, basically on the environment, all right, which would help us to. So this which is a critical topic, all right. It will feature on the exam. All right, so the environment and the economy of West Africa. Economic activities, no doubt, constitute a crucial part of human endeavor, and man earns his living by working. This is no sacrosanct in all human society, and throughout the ages, man has struggled to survive in whatever environment he finds himself. Everywhere, the economic activities of a people have always been greatly influenced by the physical environment and the climatic condition, climate. For example, the kind of food grown and eaten in southern Nigeria differs markedly from the kind of food grown and consumed in northern Nigeria. So this primarily condition the environment. So while northern Nigeria is in the savannah zone, for instance, southern Nigeria, for instance, is mostly in the forest belt. So the environmental conditioning affects not only agriculture and food, but also social relations, industries, and the general attitude of the people to life and living livelihoods. So it can be said that the environment impacts every human society, no matter how its level of attainment in science and technology. The environment condition in West Africa, the nature of the economy, especially in the pre-colonial period, and I will explain later. So this is particularly because in the realm of economic activities, people depend on the nature, the physical or topographical, climatic nature of the environment to navigate the complex terrain, all right, of life. All right. So it has been noted basically the various features in West Africa. All right. For instance, in West Africa, those communities who are people who are residing in communities such as the coastal period, coastal areas, are naturally conditioned to take certain preoccupation, such as fishing, such as canoe building, boat making, canoe building rather. So this demonstrate the impacts of the environment in shaping livelihoods. It is unexpected for people in the savannah region where there are no rivers, all right, or creeks or ocean to want to develop interest in fishing economic activities. So environmental condition in different parts of West Africa dictated the character of the economy of West Africa during the period. While the people in coastal environment were largely engaged in fishing activities, smoke fishing, all right, salt making, canoe building, and all likes. Those in the forest region were inclined be to practice broad-based agriculture, particularly farming and hunting, because the nature of the environment would not give them the opportunity to engage in fishing, no matter how interesting fishing could be to some of the people in the forest region. The unavailability of water prevents the preoccupation of these people in the forest region or in fishing. So the people in forest region will have to be farmers, they have to be hunters, they have to be palm wine tappers, and in addition to other craftsmanship like blacksmithing and all this stuff, because they needed implements to go about the everyday business of farming. So the nature of the environment would not make them to be canoe builders or to want to produce salt, because there are no physical environment for such to thrive. So ditto for those in the savannah region, the lack of forest, all right, for broad-based agricultural activities, or the absence of water would not make the people in the savannah region to practice either fishing or root crops farming to a large extent. So it therefore suggests that the people in the savannah region would most likely practice cattle grazing, if you like, pastoralism. Right? And this explains why from the modern day northern Nigeria up to other part of West Africa, Niger, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Senegal, those are areas, Chad, those are areas that are largely situated in the savannah region. All right. And what are the major issues of Sahara? So the dry land. All right. They don't have they don't have massive forests. All right. They have dry lands which are usually not very congenial for broad-based agriculture compared to those of the forest region. So this dictates the nature even in areas where agriculture is practiced. So it suggests that only few crops that are suitable for the environmental climatic condition, ecological features will be cultivated, like millet, for instance. All right, and sorghum, right, like uh, uh, other crops that are suitable with savannah region that does not require much rainfall to survive. All right, those are some of the uh, uh, the conditions that actually shape the West African economy. So environment played a significant role in shaping the livelihoods and economic productivity of the people of West Africa, whether it's in the coastal region, in the forest region, or in the savannah region. The people in these various parts of West Africa produce what the environment conditioned them to produce. So they didn't just take into a particular economic activities because they derive pleasure in it. They would rather prefer to engage in economic activities because the geographical location, all right, has conditioned them in a way, all right, to you know to take into a particular occupation, and this is largely the situation in various parts of West Africa, and it explains the changes, all right, and also the factors that influence migration of people from one place to the other. So you could see what informed it was uh, this factor, environmental factor, that condition the influx of the people from the Fulani people group, right, which are now predominant in Nigeria, to have left their ancestral, because their major economy revolves around cattle, shepherding, all right, and because they needed more expanse land, all right, to cultivate this, and that was what probably propelled them to so most of these people, for instance, within the pre-colonial period, didn't come to places like Lagos, which were coastal environments, because cattle will probably drown in this aquatic environment. All right, so they needed the savannah, land for such occupation. Neither could those cattle function well in the forest region, and for so many reasons and so. I haven't said that. I will now proceed shortly into agriculture, to the topic on agriculture, which also will touch more on the factual environment also extensively. There's no how we can talk about the topic on agriculture without talking about the impact of the environment. But it is important to state that agriculture was by far the most pervasive economic engagement of the West African people, all right, in the 19th century, which is a but in deception, all right, it was the major means of livelihoods of people of West Africa, all right, up to the 19th century. And the major aspect of agriculture involves food, crop production, animal rearing, and fishing, hunting, and gathering. That is so. Agriculture, as A.G. Hopkins, one of the prominent economic historians, has noted, was the matrix in which all other indigenous economic activities set in pre-colonial Africa. Even though there are pockets of indigenous industries and craftsmanship, but majority of these people in this industry they also have a strong, solid base in agriculture. All right, while someone is a goldsmith or blacksmith professionally, he or she has extensive farms, all right, which the family, all right, operates as a means of sustainability. So everyone was first and primarily a farmer, all right, and that was the nature in pre-colonial society. So every family, every household was predominantly a farming community, family, all right, and one did not have to give up farming in order to enter occupations such as craft and manufacturing or trade, as I've mentioned. Okay, so the major food staple cultivated by the people of West Africa, all right, before and during the 19th century were grains, all right, such as millet, sorghum. That's okay. That's we have maize. We have then in the colonial 19th century you have rice, fonio, all right. But you have yam and other root crops, potato and all these stuff. You have cocoyam, cassava, which came. But in the pre-colonial period, the people cultivated various kinds of both root crops and tree crops, to survive. So the environment tended to have determined the crops cultivated by West African peoples, all right, during the pre-colonial period. All right, as I've mentioned earlier, cereals were cultivated chiefly in the savannah, all right, while root crops were cultivated mostly in the rainforest zone. So the major determinant of the crops and the season for planting was rainfall, all right, which varied from forest zone and the savannah zones. So in the savannah, for instance, rain is sparse and falls in the period of 3 to 5 months. All right, so cereal and animal crops uh, do mainly well in this kind of environment, and this explains why this kind of crops were cultivated in the savannah zone of West Africa. In the rainforest I've mentioned, all right, the rainfall is quite greater and spread over about 7 months or eight months of the year. So this enables perennial and root crops to be grown. And this generalization should, however, be qualified basically. So since there are places in the savannah zones where forest crops do well and vice versa. So basically, the origin of agriculture in West Africa has been the subject of many discussion among scholars. So some have fallen to the ditch of the Hermetic hypothesis, that is to say that agriculture and the ideas that sustain it, you know, uh, diffused to West Africa from Egypt and other part of Asia, which is pure nonsense. So we are nonetheless assured by some scholars who have gone like Murdoch and who have noted that agriculture began independently in West Africa many millennia before the common era, before the even the era of Arabs or Europeans in Africa. So the coming of the European in the 15th century, although led to the introduction of many crops that have become almost traditional now to West Africa. The most important of these were maize, cassava, groundnut, tobacco, all right, and later on cocoa and a variety of fruits like banana in the 19th century. So these new crops from Asia and South America were adopted not because they caught the fancy of the people, but because they were seen as useful additions to the existing range of food. So yam was the most widely cultivated and intensely cultivated crops in West Africa. Yam was perhaps the king of crops among many West African peoples, in which wealth was measured in the number of barns of yam possessed in most places in different parts of West Africa. All right, and this also involve other crops, though, including other fishing, product of fishing activities. Smoked fish, for instance, was also a measure of wealth. Animal husbandry, all right, the large number of cattle those in the savannah possess too. All right, these are the characteristics from various parts. So the West African economy, considerably, just like the economies of the other section of the underdeveloped world, remain agricultural and traditional during the 19th century. And this was the situation throughout, before the 19th century. Animal husbandry, as I've mentioned, was a significant part of agricultural engagement of the people of West Africa. And one of the pillars on which the rural economy of this region was built in the pre-colonial period was the livestock, right, made up of cattle, goats, sheep, pigs, and poultry, stuffs. So this provided proteins in the diet of the people, manure for farmers, and hide and skin for craftsmen who produce leather, clothes, shoes. So cattle rearing was an intensely itinerant occupation, not only in West Africa but the whole of the African continent. So two principal reasons have been adduced by Professor Onwuka Njoku, for instance, has been responsible for the itinerant nature of cattle rearing among Africans, West Africans. First is the grazing the livestock entailed the exploitation of an intensive territory for fodder. Or you need large expanse of land and all of that, which was already available in the Savannah region. Second is you have water and salt, biological essential for human and animal survival, were scarce. All right. So for this reason, and in the case of West Africa, the Fulani cattle herders engage in trans humans, which involve them in regular treks from the savannah Sahel southward to the forest savanna areas and vice versa according to the season. So all of these this showed the nature. Then there was also the hunting and fishing, which also were more specialized activities than the gathering, all right, because they required a greater degree of skill. Hunting was especially important in the forests, as I've mentioned, where there were shortage of meat. Hunting was known to be intensified during the dry season when the demand for farm labor was at its lowest, and when restricted water supplies made it easier to locate the game. So fishing, on the other hand, was practiced along the coast, particularly in Senegal and the Gambia, Lake Chad, and Lagos, Badagry, Dahomey, the Niger Delta areas in Nigeria also. So these communities they are specialized communities in fishing, and these arose, all right, or as a result of the nature of the environment. So canoes were the main craft in the use of these fishing activities also, which also inform how the people got involved in you know canoe building. There's also occupation in trap fishing traps, all right, and lines, nets, and all this stuff in the pre-colonial period. So it is also important to observe that the availability of fish for the coastal fishermen fluctuated with tidal movement of the sea, all right, with different floods period of the river in the pre-colonial. So what is happening in contemporary is also the same in the pre-colonial period also. So, and this also explains the reason many West African people tend to migrate in search of their cash. Among the riverine Igbo, for instance, fishermen moved up the River Niger in the pre-colonial period as far as Igala and Bassa territories in search of their cash. All right. So fishing migration often led to the development of new fishing grounds. For instance, in the pre-colonial period, it's been established that the present-day Lagos, before the arrival of the Awori around the 12th century, had been, had witnessed the influx of people who come and go from different parts of, the Niger Delta, Ikale, in southern Ondo, Ilaje, all those Ishekiri people, who use a canoe to conduct fishing expedition up to Lagos, Badagry, and return home. So, having said all of this, generally, with regards to agriculture now, one of the factors that made agriculture, all right, and even hunting, and even husbandry very possible was the factors of production, in which land is the main issue. So land was the only one of the factors of production that enabled agriculture, all right, in pre-colonial Africa. So the abundance of land made agriculture to thrive among the pre-colonial period. It was actually unimaginable that a prospective farmer would have any difficulty obtaining land for his use, whether for farming or for animal husbandry, all right, during the pre-colonial period. So while it did not have outright ownership, because the lands are communally owned, all right, belong to the entire family, for instance, the community which is appropriated through the head of the family. A farmer was entitled to whatever family land, all right, was available in his place of birth. And if he migrated to some other area, he would assume temporary tenancy over such land that he needed, or he could at least function as a sharecropper. Although there was hardly any technological knowledge with which to redeem waterlogs or otherwise uh, unsuitable land resources, farmland was plentiful enough, not to create a constraint on development in the pre-colonial West Africa. So the issue of people fighting farmer elder didn't arose, all right, because the people were largely accommodated. The land, all right, no, of the factors of production, all right, needed for economic activity, land was the one that was so surplus. Capital might be a bit scarce, labor was insufficient, but land was and perhaps the demographic, the population issue factor also was because of the level of mortality in pre-colonial infant mortality, all right, perhaps there were not many medical centers, all right, so there was also other factors which made it necessary for the population to the slave trade, for instance, which carted millions of people away. So there were not much people who could scramble for land. So that is to say that a major explanation for the abundant supply of land, all right, was that population growth had not come to such a high dimension, as it subsequently did after early decades of the 20th century and now. So the pressure on land was therefore manageable, and even though land fertility could be replenished because of inadequate knowledge of attaining manure, virgin areas or right. So this was so intensive agriculture featuring definite rotational order for crops could not be adopted basically, all right, in West Africa. So, but if land was not a constraint on the labor was, as I've mentioned, among all the factors of production, land was the only one that was surplus. Labor was scarce because population was kept at base due to many factors. So, it was indeed because the supply of labor was inadequate that land did not constitute a problem. I've mentioned that. So, labor shortage was probably also a reflection of the prevalent low life expectancy. The issue of sickle cell arising from the fact that people, there were no technology for people when they married to do genotype tests. So people SS just marrying SS, all right, and AS marrying AS and producing SS, and what the phenomenon known as abiku, for instance, among Yoruba, was people thought that it was a demon that was killing the children, or it was because people before marriage you just go ahead and pick a woman without even knowing the genotype, right? And all of this led to infant mortality. So population, all right, to work on the farm, labor was scarce, all right, and these are perhaps some of the key factors that shape agriculture during the pre-colonial period. But it is also important that family labor was also a major means through which agriculture was sustained. All right, because each individual household will mobilize its own economic base, which is a labor supply from its a family through polygamy. All right, polygamy helped to engender agricultural productivity, labor supply, particularly during the pre-colonial period. And okay, let me stop at this junction. Talk about transport. All right, I can later come to maybe the trans-Saharan trade and transatlantic later. So, in context of transport system in pre-colonial period, so three types of transport system were practiced in West Africa before and maybe during the 19th century. All right, when before 19th century, when introduction of motor transport was introduced by the Europeans. So these primordial forms of transport included human porterage, animal transports, basically. So we'll look at them one after the others, and later look at the changes that were brought. So human porterage simply means the carriage of goods by man at the same time as he transports himself by walking. So most of the head porters were recruited from nuclear and extended family settings, and majority of heads of families in West Africa were farmers who depended greatly on their wives, and children for the movement of agricultural products and also from the farm. Again, a man's production had to be carried to the consumer, and at the peak of harvesting, this was done at the peak of harvesting, when immediate removal of crops from the farm to the villages and marketplaces was a matter of urgency. So human portrayed throughout pre-colonial West Africa made use of local roads or bush paths that linked neighboring villages, city states, and even kingdoms and empires. Long distance traders recruited the services of slave porters who carried their goods to distant markets, for instance. And apart from slave porters, carriers also transported goods through land routes. Professional carriers were also free people. There were professional carriers who were free people, mainly strong men, who sustained their livelihoods through carrying goods from one place to the other. Of course, if you have been to some of these markets, I know they don't do it but in my 12, for instance, I go to my 12 every month with my wife, and each time we bought something from the market. So there are people who specialize. That's what they call, they call them alabaru, men and women who just collect the stuff from you and help you take it to the car. Many miles. Usually usually park under the bridge in the my 12 market, for instance, and you see those people carrying large volumes of commodities that you have purchased. So long distance traders recruited the services of slave porters who carried their goods and to distant markets. And apart from the slave porters, carriers also transported goods through land route. And I've mentioned professional carriers were free people, mainly strong men, who sustained their livelihoods through carrying goods from one place to the other. Professor Ogunremi and Toyin Falola have submitted that scarcity of porters often limited production of fragile products most times, such as pots, because it was easy for porters to sleep when the ground was soft and pots to be broken in the wet season. This kind of clay pot, which was predominant in the pre-colonial period. All right, and there was also the issue of snakes, scorpion, and ants, which were common on the route. All right, streams had to be fogged most times. There were flooded section of the route, all right, which limited the ability of these porters to carry heavy loads and walk freely. So one major problem that characterized the human portrait system in pre-colonial West Africa was the insecure nature of the bush paths. Also, bush paths used as trade routes and ordinary roads were not usually safe, especially from 15th century up to the 19th century, when slave trade was quite high. So there was intertribal war, all right, which hampered trade on goods, trade and goods and merchandise. Travelers and traders areas constantly needed assistance of road guides. In fact, if you have read the works of Professor Toyin Falola, I think Yoruba toll system. So for people, long distance traders moving, for instance, smoked fish from Lagos, all right, to like Ilorin, will have to recruit the services of strong men, all right, road guide, known as road guides, all right, who accompany, if you like it, escorts, all right, who will recruit the service of escorts to escort them and their goods, maybe from Lagos to Ilorin, all right, to ensure that no tragedy occur on the road. You could see the nature. So this actually complicated commercial activities in the pre-colonial period, especially from 15th century up to the 19th century. Water transportation. I won't talk about portrait water transportation. So during the pre-colonial period, West African rivers also served as carriers of trade, and this has been noted by many historians who have highlighted that river systems played much large parts as means of communication and carriers of trade and ideas in the pre-colonial period. So before the coming of highways, railways, and airways, rivers provided the only thoroughfare for the movement of people or for cheap transportation of large quantities of commodities over long distances in many parts of West Africa. So the presence of major rivers like the Niger and the Benue, as well as other inland waterways such as streams, rivulets, and creeks, paved the way for marine transportation. Okay, so pre-colonial West Africa, African people prompted the efficacy of maritime or marine transportation through the dredging of rivers, of streams, of creek to make them navigable by canoeists, right? Those who drive the canoe, basically. So they needed the services of people who usually dredge the river, removing the sand to make it. And this was also an occupation, you could see. So imagine now, even the Atlantic are usually dredged. The big oceans are dredged. We do with technology now. So imagine a pre-colonial period. Apart from those who were engaging in transport system, there were those whose occupation basically was to dredge the rivers, the streams, and to make it passable for canoes, all right, and other goods. Apart from canoe, there are also logs, all right, which were used. Apart from those, today you use container, for instance, to bring goods from Europe to Africa. All right, so imagine how the pre-colonial society, how did they carry large or massive amount of goods from one place to the other? So what they did was to consult large number of timber, which they tied together with they tied them with chain, all right, with metal, all right, nailing them together, in a very expansive manner, and on top of them, many goods will be floated, to their destination. Just like you now use modern technology to float the container on a ship. So this was a pattern of pre-colonial period. Where people were involved in all of this. So these canoes can also be ambushed also by local creek pirates, just as we have marine pirates across the sea. So who intercept river the ships. In the pre-colonial, there were local creek pirates who also intercepted river boats, all right, for the purpose of robbing market men and women. So the creek pirates were shaved with local knives, all right. On the whole, the water bodies actually provided important transport platforms in West Africa, and they all right. So then there's animal transport. So the most effective transport system. This is the most a transport system used in transportation system, especially in the Sahel region of West Africa. All right, and this was the animal transport. So these animals included the donkey, horses, mules, innies, bullocks, and camel. Of this, the donkey was the most important. This was because of three interrelated factors. The first is that the breeding of donkey was easy and inexpensive, and all right. So the second is that the donkeys were cheap to maintain, and the third is that donkey had a reputation for being patient, all right, and exceptional endurance. It has exceptional endurance, unlike the others, like the horse, for instance, might usually get provoked, all right, and misbehave often. So one major problem with donkeys, however, was its dislike of water. So donkey ate to cross streams or to be wetted by the rain. So the trans-Saharan trade relied effectively on the instrumentality of the camel, which, unlike other beasts like beasts of burden, could do without water or the horse now, for instance, can still pass into through water, and but the donkey. So this was the nature of transport system in pre-colonial West Africa. Let me now move to the trans-Saharan trade. The trans-Saharan trade. So the trans-Saharan trade emerged as a result of the existence of civilization on the two sides of the Sahara Desert. Okay, so in the pre-colonial West Africa, on the one hand was the existence of flourishing civilization and states in the North Africa and Mediterranean region, which included the Levant and even the Egyptian civilization and all of that. And all right, but in West Africa too, they have their own unique civilization. All right, located in sub-Saharan Africa. There was also, before the full opening of the trans-Saharan trade, diplomatic relations between the states of Tripoli, for instance, Egypt, and the Ottoman Empire, basically, all right, through religion. And with such relations, all right, trade flow almost smoothly, all right, with from North Africa, with the aim of propagating also religion, Islam. So there were the steep towns and civilization center in the central Saharan area, an area dominated by the Berbers also, right, which had shared proximity, for instance, between some West African countries with North Africa. So this enabled trade, right, which must have started as early as the 9th century with the old Ghana Empire in West African region. So after Ghana, a number of other empires, including the Mali, the Songhai Empire, cropped up. They continued with both trade and diplomatic relations with North African states. So around the 15th century, the trans-Saharan trade kept on shifting to Hausa land. All right, that is among the Hausa states, which included Kano, Katsina, Zauzau, and other smaller states. And this trade moved down to the forest areas of the south, especially into the Oyo Empire, which was situated by the Niger Bend, all right, close to the Nupe land and all of that. That was the initial location of the old Oyo Empire. So the trans-Saharan trade came to boost the Hausa regional Gonja trade and found its way to Ghana again. So to the eastern portion of Hausa land lay the Kanem Borno Empire. So this state too had also developed diplomatic relations with the Muslims, the Ottoman Muslim, all right. Then the trade also continued. So this great trade covered the centuries between 15th and 19th century. All right. Then also there was some aspect before then. So the trade was responsible for the prosperity of many of the West African states during their peak period. And all right, there was an avalanche of interaction between the West African people. So what were the commodities sold and bought during the trans-Saharan trade? A lot of commodities were traded between the North African Berbers and Arab traders and their West African counterparts, especially those in Hausa states of Katsina, Kano, Zauzau. Ghana was noted for their quality gold, which was taken to the Fezzan market, all right, in North Africa for goods meat to manufacture into luxury items. Salt was another product that was widely consumed. So even in the old KB kingdom, salt was mined at the Oga salt site. So horses and camel were also part of the commodities which the kings and the emperors of West Africa patronized in order to build up their cavalry forces for wars. So a variety of spices were also exchanged. However, one of the most important items of trade was also slaves. African slaves were bought and transported largely for domestic service in the homes of rich people across the Middle East. So some slaves from Hausa land were reported to have taken part in wars in Saudi Arabia and Baghdad in modern Iraq. And this has spurred in recent times debate about the effect of slave trade on the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern areas. All right, because we talk more only about the transatlantic slave trade, without putting much emphasis on the. So what I'm saying is that the following a few items constituted the commodities traded in the transatlantic trade. One, gold. Two, salt. Three, horses. All right. Four, Ottoman Dane guns. All right, which was sold by the Berbers to the West African people. Five, slaves. Six, ostrich feathers. Seven, spices. Then you have the Ottoman and Libyan rugs, caps, and jugs. And no, so in the transatlantic trade also, gold was much more valuable than other commodities. So it was much more than a commodity. In fact, its abundance in West Africa, especially under the ancient Ghana kingdom, was one of the major reasons behind the opening up of prosperous uh, the prosperous trade across Sahara Desert with people of North Africa. So from a geographical standpoint, all right, gold as an article of trade, all right, could be said to have been procured from the alluvial deposits, all right, the Ghana Empire, which popularized West African people during this period in West Africa. Also various West African areas, all right, also possess different proportions of these, resources. Generally, the areas have been identified. All of these areas, Ghana, Bambok, Galam, all right, have been the Senegal, the Niger River areas have been, recognized, identified, all right, as the major sources of gold, which were traded to North Africa and Europe during the pre-colonial period. So, from a historical perspective, of course, you have three main gold fields which are identifiable. The earliest were the gold mines of Bambouk, as I've mentioned, located at the confluence of Senegal and Falemi rivers. So these were they were mainly exploited during the time of ancient Ghana Empire, and there was also those of the Borough on the Upper Niger. All right, there was a large gold deposit there, which had been existing from the 12th century. All right, and this was under the influence of the Mali Empire, all right, which effectively controlled the routes to the gold fields as well. And there was also the third area, which endowed with gold, in the Akan forest. All right, and in present day, yeah, Ghana and all the stuff. So the trans-Saharan trade, all right, also was popularized, with the sales of slaves. All right, it was a place where the North African and Middle East people came to buy African slaves. So slavery has been a key phenomenon in human history. That is to say, so it's been found in many places in Asia, Europe, Asia, North Africa, where African people slaves were used for various purposes before the advent of the transatlantic slave trade. So during the transatlantic trade, in fact, so sub-Saharan Africa, and more precisely West Africa, took the role of a major supplier of slaves. All right, slaves from Western and Central Sudan and some part of the forest region were provided, in the trans-Saharan market. Okay, so the slaves were tied with chain and marched through the Sahara Desert down to North Africa, and from there to Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula, and even to Europe. This was before the 15th century when the main transatlantic slave trade started. So the African slaves, taken to other part of West Africa, Arab world, were invariably used as domestic slaves, entertainers, and servants. Right. In a few cases, they were engaged in cultivating land on agricultural estates, as was the case in Morocco and a few places. Then the trans another commodities, as I mentioned, was salt, traded in the trans-Saharan trade. All right, or it was an important commodity which was largely sought, up to the 19th century. So a substantial of, and this is due to a substantial amount of salt, deposit in West Africa due to the oceans, the rivers, the oceans, all right, that surrounds this some of the West African, especially in Senegambia and Gambia, in the Badagry, Lagos, and all the other places, the River Niger area. So much of the salt was extracted in the form of rock salt or neutron found in the Sahara Desert also, and in those parts of West Africa close to the desert. So it revolutionized the economy of West Africa before. All right. So ostrich were sold. I've mentioned another commodities of trade was horses, which were brought from North Africa by the Berbers from Tripoli and Egypt. All right. It was a major economy of those North Africa, sold to kingdoms in West Africa. All right. They exchanged them most times for slaves and for other commodities which were traded during the pre-colonial period. What else? Okay, of course, spices were exchanged. All right, spices, important spices. All right, for flavor, food flavor. The major spices sold in this trade were pepper, cloves, cinnamon, ginger, cardamom, and nutmeg. All right, these spices, sourced largely from Asia, all right, reach West Africa through the Arab traders and stuff. Then there was the leather works, which were exchanged between the two West African people and the North Africa. Brass work and all the stuff were also largely exchanged. So, what are the major effects of the trans-Saharan trade on the people of West Africa? So, the trans-Saharan trade was such a huge activity that affected the West African people, all right, permanently. It affected all facets of life: political, social, economic, and religious. All right, different societies in different locations began to trade with one another, in a way, all right, to maximize, the opportunities that are economic, particularly inherent in this trade, to maximize wealth, all right, to exchange. So it's actually boosted, capital formation, all right, It introduced international or external trade. That's the point. It led, number two, to the introduction of camels as a means of transportation because of its widespread use. All right, so the camel was called the sheep of the desert, the sheep of the desert. All right, because they were the ones who could navigate the terrain. Number three is that it led to the introduction of slave trade across the Sahara. The trans-Saharan trade did that. Four is that it led to the introduction of Islam as a religion and the use of Arabic language and literacy. Number five is that it encouraged interactions between North Africa and West Africa. And number six, again, is that it forged closer relationship leading to marriages between North Africans and people of West Africa, especially the Hausa areas. Again, number seven, you can say that kingdoms and empires such as Mali Empire and Songhai Empire grew up and were wealthy from the trade of the Trans-Saharan network. The Trans-Saharan trade also exposed the state and the access to goods to the outside world beyond West African region. All right, the need for places where business could be transacted led to increased urbanization in West Africa. So as trade routes shifted from one place to the other, urbanization was experienced in some of those places during this period. And I think I've done a few justice to this topic. Atlantic slave trade now. So the transatlantic slave trade started around the 1480. All right, the Portuguese were the first to discover the black people. All right, were useful working on their plantation. All right, I think I mentioned it in one of my earlier tutorial. So the need for slaves was initially very minimal, as most of them taking, did not do much work. And apart from some light work uh, on the plantation and domestic duties, many of the slaves experienced cruelty. Some black people were even given as gift to Portuguese sailors. All right, but by 1532, the transatlantic slave trade had become very lucrative. But towards the mid of the 1500s, Britain, Holland had also joined Portugal, all right, in this trade. Spain followed suit. On the Caribbean island, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the English and the Dutch had established colonies with sugar plantations in need of slaves. So in the 1700s, cotton plantations were also established in great numbers in southern United States. So this further triggered more demand for slaves from Africa to work on the plantations. So before the outburst of the transatlantic slave trade, there was domestic slavery in Africa, as I've mentioned earlier, basically through the trans-Saharan system. This domestic slavery in Africa involved few people who were largely brought and sold locally, and they had some rights. At some point, in some cultures, they were freed and allowed to marry and raise their own family. Some of them even became very influential. Example is Jaja of Opobo. All right. So on the other hand, the transatlantic slave trade gave the slaves no rights. Many of them died as they were being transported to the New World, where they were sold, sometimes resold, all right, with torture. So the women had children in most cases for their masters and died as slaves. All right, and it's been estimated the number of slaves, people from Africa captured, all right, is quite inexplicable. It cannot be accounted for. It was huge to be specific. What are the major impact of the Atlantic slave trade? All right. It is important to first note that the visit of the Portuguese explorers to West Africa, especially in the Benin Kingdom, was what led to the emergence of this obnoxious trade. Africans were forcefully emigrated from their ancestral homeland to the Americas, where they led a life of cruelty. They lived a life of cruelty that was characterized by inhuman treatment of all kinds. By the time the slave trade ended towards the second half of the 19th century, Africa had been adversely affected, West Africa particularly. All right, about 4 generations of Africans had been lost to European cruelty and inhumanity. All right, so I've mentioned that the impact, could be social, political, economic, psychological. All right, socially, one social impact, as I've mentioned, I think one of the other stuffs I did was the fact that families were dislocated, lineages disturbed, and many lost their sense of identity. After being set free later, after 400 years, the estates became socially unfit, many of them to fit into their society, as things have changed. If you have been dislocated from your community for, let's say, even 20 years, to say the least, you want to go back, do you know how disconnected you must have been? So much less for people whose forefathers were disconnected for 400 years. So political impact, the slave trade greatly destabilized African society. The decline of trade was helped by the political agitations of the humanitarian movement, especially the British also in the 19th century. But the polity had been shattered by a series of wars and raiding that characterized West Africa. Economically, the economy declined as millions of able-bodied men and women who should be productive, all right, and contribute to the development of West Africa, were lost to the slave trade, and the psychological impacts continue to affect or destabilize the descendants of those taken. The wiring and the hypnotism, all right, of slave trade is at the root of the social dysfunction, all right, that you experience in Africa. Corruption, bribery, dishonesty, inordinate accumulation of wealth, betrayal, opaqueness, disloyalty, lack of patriotism, zero statesmanship, lack of national concern, all right, greed, nepotism. All of these are the roots. They are the root effects of the transatlantic slave trade. So, of course, the transatlantic slave trade ended long ago. The psychological impact it had on Africans, especially in the diaspora, still lingers. Today, black people in America, Europe, and elsewhere still suffer from some form of racism and racial segregation, right, in different parts of West Africa. So these are critical factor, basically. So you could say that, is to summarize, that when the slave trade began, the transatlantic slave trade, all right, the Portuguese explorer was the one who pioneered it in 1480, where they took slaves to this Sao Tome, the Portuguese island, and those involved in this trade, they also attracted other Europeans, all right, like Britain, Holland, and France, and Spain. And with this, the slave trade, took a long dimension before it was called off in the 19th century.